This is Platemark with me, Ann Shafer. I'm an independent curator who focuses on works on paper. That includes prints, drawings, photographs, and books. Platemark is a podcast about prints and the printmaking ecosystem. Prints meaning fine art prints, usually limited editions, although not always. We're talking about etchings, woodcuts, lithographs, screen prints, that sort of thing. I'm trying to support the print ecosystem by introducing listeners to people who occupy various roles in the ecosystem. That includes artists, of course, but also printers, print publishers, gallery people, museum curators, art historians, authors, you name it. We're going to share with you stories that include, and hopefully will make more understandable, some of the challenging technical parts and bits of printmaking. I'm hoping to open up this corner of the art world to you, where people are by necessity collaborative, welcoming, generous, and the nicest people in the art world. The print fairs you go to will blow other art fairs away with their welcoming attitude. People will talk to you and engage you and tell you how they made the thing that you're looking at and tell you about working with the artist who made that thing. I think it's the most charming spot in the art world, if you ask me. I like genuine. I want genuine artists, and I want genuine people helping artists to make genuine things. That's why I'm here, and why I'm sharing all these stories with you, helping you understand better why prints are special and worthy of attention. The other reason, of course, is that multiples are always more affordable because there's more than one. It's a terrific gateway into collecting art. You can collect things by really famous artists for 10x less than you would for a work in a different medium, like painting and sculpture. So that's what we're doing here. My guest today is Jenny Robinson, who is an artist and also a print shop owner. She just opened a new print shop in Sydney, Australia, the Jenny Robinson Print Studio. We talk about the move to Sydney from, they spent some time in Slovenia during the Trump years. We'll talk about that. And also we'll talk about her work, which is generally giant and generally has to do with structures, human structures, architecture, and them as a metaphor for the structures of our lives and how we maneuver through the world. Okay, housekeeping. I identify as a cis het white woman, and I use the pronouns she, her. I record Platemark in Baltimore, Maryland, the land of the Piscataway Conoy people. Images that Jenny and I talk about will be over in the show notes at platemarkpodcast.com. Also over there, you can sign on to get onto our newsletter list. You'll get emails that will announce new episodes, but also sometimes some other things. You could also go over to Facebook and join our Platemark group. It's a nice group of folks. We chit-chat about all sorts of things, and we'd love to have you join us. All right, I think that's it. Let's get rolling. Jenny, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for coming on Platemark.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. I've been listening to your show, so I'm very excited to be part of it.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, I know you have been on my sister podcast, Hello Print Friend. And,
Yes.
Sometimes we overlap, but sometimes I don't think it matters because we have different kinds of conversations and you have plenty to say.
I do. Sometimes I have too much to say.
I doubt that. So first order of business, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name's Jenny Robinson. I'm a printmaker. I know some people don't like to say I'm a printmaker, but I'm proud and loud about being a printmaker. I lived in America for 20 years. Then we had a short time in Slovenia, a couple of years in Slovenia during the Trump years. And then we've now moved to Australia, where we've opened a print atelier in the heart of Sydney.
Did you really move to Slovenia because of Trump?
We kind of did. Everyone says if Trump gets in, I'm going to move.
Yes, but you actually did
it. Well, I'm English and my husband's Australian. He's an American citizen, but I'm not. And we'd been there like 18 or 19 years. And honestly, it was so mad. It was 2 years into Trump's tenure. And I don't know, it was just insane. Even in San Francisco, you wake up every morning. Probably shouldn't get into politics so early, but it was insane. And it was horrible. It was a horrible way to be. At the same time, Brexit was happening in Britain, and we had that lunatic, Boris Johnson in charge. So it's sort of like two very similar characters, I think. So we didn't want to go back to England. My mum had Alzheimer's, so I wanted to be close as well, but I didn't want to live in England at that point either. So, my husband and I were out for a drink one night, and I just said to him, I can't stand it. I want to go back to Europe while I'm still a European. I want to live in Europe while I still can, because when Brexit comes through, that'll be the end of that. And I just said, ask them if you can work from home for a couple of years. So anyway, he did ask them, and they actually had an office in Paris and in Slovenia. So we're like, where's Slovenia? So we looked it up on the map. So it really came down to a choice between Paris and Slovenia. And I was like, well, we know Paris, and yeah, it's close to London, but it's a big city. It's like living in a big city again. And so we just, had a look where Slovenia was, bad geography. And it's in the most amazing part of Europe, a part that we didn't know very well. And so we just decided to move there for 2 years, which we did.
Is Slovenia one of the they split up into so many little pieces? Is it one of the ones that's landlocked, or does it have coastline?
It has a tiny coastline. It has about 40 kilometers, I think. But so when Yugoslavia split up, Slovenia actually got out before the civil war started. I think they had very short skirmishes. And then I think they just thought, oh, Slovenia's not worth it because there aren't enough. I don't really know the history that well. But anyways, Slovenia was lucky, and it was separated off before the civil war started, before the war in the Balkans started. And so it really wasn't damaged at all. So it's a tiny country. It's only got 3 million people, I think. Most people drive through it, like they drive through from Northern Europe. There's a road that goes all the way through to the Adriatic. So I think most people just drive through it. But it's a lovely little country, very beautiful, lots of mountains. They're all very outdoorsy, lots of cycling and walking up hills and stuff. So we moved to Ljubljana for 2 years, yeah.
Oh, nice. Did you didn't open a print shop there? What did you do?
Well, yeah, that was sort of a bit of an issue, because another reason we chose Ljubljana was because it has this history of print. They introduced a biennale for printmaking in 1955.
What?
And it was the first biennale for printmaking. And they had everybody show their, they had Hockney and all these big, big names in the sort of 60s and 70s. And they have a print museum, like a villa in the middle of Tivoli Park, which is this beautiful park in the middle of Ljubljana. And it's dedicated to print and has been for years, for decades. And so I thought, oh, well, Ljubljana will have this thriving printmaking community, and there'll be open access print shops everywhere, and I'll be able to just slot in and get to know all these printmakers and have a lovely time.
It takes activeness to keep a print thing going, right? Like you can't just sort of assume somebody will you have to do it yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, they still have it. They still have the thing. It was on when I was there. And I don't know, there were like 2 prints in it. And it was yeah, there was one, I know, because I was really excited about it. I tried to volunteer, but they didn't want me. So it was a little bit like, what are you doing here? Stop trying to bustle in on our thing. But one of their exhibits was in a sort of a pop-up downtown, and it was basically a tray of sand with cigarettes in it. And I'm like, that's not a print. What is that? Yeah, so it was interesting, but it sort of was hard to break in there because, I knew a couple of people who were mutual friends of the director of the print museum. And so I sort of marched off up there when I first got there to introduce myself, just to say, hello, are there could you tell me where the print shops are and all that stuff. So I introduced myself to her, and she was sort of like, so, like, what do you want? Kind of a little bit like that. I mean, I became friendly with her after that, but the first reaction was very much, what?
Wow.
And so I had a cup of coffee with her the next week, persevered. And I asked her, are there any open access print studios here that I could access so I can do some printmaking? And she was like, no, you won't find any. And I was like, well, there must be some, because of the history of printmaking. And she was like, no, they're all really run down and the presses are no good. But actually, it turned out there were 5 presses there. And there was one 10 feet behind us because the museum actually has a print studio. So I did actually end up working in there just after the lockdown. And it was great. It was run by this really lovely younger printmaker, and it was really nice to work in there. But it took me a long time to get my hands on a press. And so I just decided to go to art print residence in Barcelona, which is trying to hop on a plane and fly down there.
Wait, you could get on a plane. People were allowed in and out, and
oh, well, this was before the pandemic. We got there at the end of 2018, and that's the other thing. Never move to a country in the middle of winter, because it is freezing over there. It's bloody freezing, and so you don't really get out, and you don't meet many people because you're huddled up inside because it's really cold. So we did that for 2 years. So we were there for a year before the pandemic, and then we were there for a year during the pandemic.
Can you remember when you first knew you were an artist and when prints came into the picture?
You know, I grew up in Borneo, and I went to boarding school in Devon in England. And so, and my parents weren't particularly interested in that kind of thing. My father was an engineer. My mother actually she lived in the East for a long time, so she took up Chinese painting and stuff like that when she lived in Singapore. But so she was interested, but we never sort of went to museums because there weren't really any in Borneo, you know, not the sort of background that most people have. And at boarding school, we didn't have much of that either. It was a Catholic boarding school. So there wasn't a lot of art education at that time. It wasn't until I went to art college that I started being sort of introduced to all of that. And I remember when I said I wanted to go to art college when I was at school, the nuns, we're not Catholics, by the way, it's just they sent us there because they left it a bit late. But the nun said to my mum, don't let Jenny go to an art college because it is a bed. They are beds of sin and vice. So I'm like, let me go. I'm going. Beds of sin and vice. It was a bit disappointing, actually. So it was when I went to art college, really, that I started. And then I did a foundation. So in England, you did a foundation course for a year, which meant that you did ceramics and you did, you know, painting, copper bashing, textiles, all that stuff, and printmaking. And when I did the printmaking course, that was it. I was completely in love with it. It was the one thing that I just wanted to do. And then I applied to do my degree in printmaking.
What was it about printmaking that sucked you in so fast?
I don't know. I actually don't know because, you know, I did ceramics, which I quite enjoyed. We built a raku kiln and stayed up all night feeding it and whatnot. It was fun. But I don't know. Maybe it's something to do with all the techniques and maybe the way you have to sit quietly and you have to think in layers and you have to rethink things. I also love the excitement of pulling a print because you're never quite sure what you've got, especially when you're learning. I still get that excitement when I pull a print, you know, or disappointment, depending on how it goes.
I'm sure it's never disappointing, Jenny.
It quite often is, actually. And, you know, sometimes when I'm printing on gampi, I did it the other day. I was printing on gampi, and I haven't printed for quite a long time on gampi. It's been a couple of years. And I made it too wet, so when I pulled it, half the paper stayed on the plate, and I was like, oh, that's not good. I've lost my mojo.
Oh,
and what I do on days like that is I just stop printing and I go and have a cup of tea, clear everything away, because it's never going to get better.
So when you're printing with gampi, I always feel like people say it looks fragile, but it's not because it's super strong because the fibers are long, and plus it must be super expensive.
It is, and it is now because you can't get it. When I was in San Francisco, I learned how to handle gampi. It was from Paul Mullowney, who had a print studio in San Francisco. He's now up in Portland. And I had started working on gampi, but of course I didn't start small, I started massive. And so, the paper is just really hard to work on when it's sort of 1 meter long or 2 meters long. And it was folding in on itself and it was tearing because I was making it so wet. So I asked Paul if he would teach me and I got a group together and asked him to teach us how to handle gampi, really. So I did a weekend workshop with him and it changed my whole practice. It just changed my life in terms of how I was printing and what I was doing. Because I was working on gampi and I loved it, but I was like, now what do you do with it? Because it's so thin. And you're right, it's super strong when it's dry, but when it's wet, you can put holes in it quite easily if you're rough with it. And if it folds in on itself, it's like a piece of wet tissue. It's where do you find the edge and how do you pull it out and stuff. So he taught me all that, and then at the end of the workshop, I'm like, oh well, I'll just I'll sheen collet that onto some BFK or something. And he was like, oh, why? And I'm like, well, why not? And he was like, well, why would you do that to a piece of gampi? It made me think. It's like, yeah, well, why would I actually? Because it's so beautiful as it is. And if you back it with one sheet of, then it still has that beauty. It's not it doesn't flow the way it does when it's unbacked, but it just stabilizes it. But it still has that beautiful sheen on it. And it's just something about the thinness of the paper. And I love that sort of juxtaposition between the thinness of the paper and the subject matter that I use, the heaviness of the steel structures. And the idea that those structures will last forever. They're supposed to be really big and strong and they're indestructible in a way. That's what they look like. And you think that the paper is the opposite. But in fact, often the paper is the thing that lasts. I mean, museums have paper that's 800-900 years old, and what's depicted on them is long gone. So I love that idea of the gampi. And I pretty much use Japanese paper all the time now. I never use Western paper.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And that was since that, really literally since that weekend with Paul. It completely changed everything for me. It was great.
But as I'm thinking about the listeners and going, A, what's gampi? And B, how could it possibly take an entire weekend to teach you how to handle it?
So Paul Mullowney lived in Japan for 10 years. And I think he was looked after some temple or something with his wife for 10 years. He was a custodian or something. I mean, I may have got that wrong, but and so I think he learned a lot about papers. He used to work for Crown Point and sort of doing all that. First of all, I brought in a whole bunch of really big prints that I'd printed. They were sort of like, I don't know, they were maybe 60 by 40 on gampi. And, I just didn't know what to do with them. I mean, gampi is so thin and so sort of floaty. It's like, well, how do I frame it or how do I show it? And I knew that he did backing and seaming. And I also was very interested in, what if I want to do like 6 or 7 prints and put them together? How do I do that, on gampi? And how do I do that on Japanese paper in general? So the backing of the gampi is an old Japanese tradition. And Chinese, actually, going right back to when paper was invented. So that's a whole thing you have to learn. You have to learn how to, and it's all very authentic. You have to get the jinshofu, which is basically the wheat paste, purified wheat paste. You have to cook that up for half an hour until it's a bit like cooking white sauce or something, until it's transparent. So that takes about 20 minutes, and you have to stir. And then when that cools down, you have to sieve it and strain it so that it's easy to put water in to mix with water. And then you sort of put water in until it becomes almost like water again, the glue. And then you have to learn how to sort of smooth out it does take ages. You have to learn how to smooth out the gampi onto a table so there's no wrinkles on it without tearing it or anything. So you do that. And then you get another piece of paper, another piece of Japanese paper, a bit thicker. And then you brush the glue all over that. And then you transfer the glued paper onto the gampi like this. So that it thickens it up. They use this in restoration all the time.
Sure.
It's a way of, and then you have to pound it. And all these techniques have special brushes. Of course they do. They have all these beautiful brushes. And the pounding brush, you have to pound it until the two papers almost become one piece of paper. And then you let that dry, and then you have to stretch them, which is a whole other thing. So you have to learn how to put them onto a board that's been lacquered to the right lacqueriness, all technical terms here. And then you sort of stick it on the board, and then you leave it on the board for a couple of months while it completely flattens, depending on the weather. I think they do leave it. I mean, I've left a print on the wall for like 6 months because I didn't know what to do with it because it was so big. And it just stays nice and flat. And then you take that off the wall, and then you get a piece of some kind of wax, and you wax the whole of the back of it. And then you get these prayer beads, and then you rub them all over the back of it. And I think that helps it stay flat. So even if it's been rolled, when it's unrolled, it stays quite flat.
What?
I know, it's a palaver. And that's only the beginning. And then, I mean, that's the beginning. And then you have to learn how to seam. Like if you've got several pieces, I've made pieces where I've got 8 pieces or 12 pieces that I want to put together to make a bigger piece. So then you have to learn to seam the 2 pieces together so that there's no seam basically. So then you have to take them off the board, cut them down to the exact right, you have to cut right down to the image, and then you have to glue them together. And then you have to back them again so that the seams won't pop. I mean, it goes on forever. I don't know why I love it so much. I know, it's a palaver. It takes months.
Yeah, I asked the right question. Once you get the backing sheet with the glue onto the gampi on the table, why wouldn't you put it through a press?
That's a good question, because I did a demo at Printopia in New Zealand last weekend. It's this print festival they've just started up there, which is great. And somebody said that to me. She said, why don't you just stick it through the... This is after I'd done 2 hours of demo. She goes, excuse me, why don't you just stick it through the press? Because it doesn't work, because everything is quite wet. So if you stick it through the press, it's just going to... I don't think that would... I think that's what you do when you do chine collé onto Western paper,
Right.
like Crown. They put the gampi on, then they cut the edge, and then they run it all through at the same time. But I think when you're backing paper, it's a whole different thing. I think you'd squidge all the glue out, and it would wrinkle too. I mean, it wrinkles really easily. You can get creases in it, which you have to pound out with your pounding brush.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it is quite complex.
Yeah.
Why not just print it on Western paper?
Maybe we should talk about your work, because the idea of scale has come up multiple times. And I think, obviously I'll put up some pictures on the show notes to help people understand exactly how big your work is. But can you describe A, why scale is important, and B, what the subject matter is with a little more depth?
So I've always been interested in structure. I mean, my father and my grandfather were both engineers. So I think that explains my interest in it. Because, I often asked by people, I mean, I used to have open studios in San Francisco, and I'd be the only person in there, and my name would be above the door. And I'd have some bloke would come in and he'd go, where's the artist? And I'd be like, standing right here. And he goes, this work looks like it's been done by a man.
Oh, no.
And I've had that so often, not as much lately, I have to say. I think men are getting it. But like if my husband would be in there with me, and I'd be talking to him, they'd talk to him. And he'd go, don't talk to me. I'm not the artist, talk to her. But they'd still talk to him. So it's quite interesting. I think there's a sort of a assumption that women don't do work like that. I don't know why, but I mean, that is changing. But, 15 years ago, I got a lot of that. I've always drawn what's around me. So all my prints have come from my own personal experience of place, really. Places I've been, places I've visited. And I'm very interested in the idea of buildings look the same when they're going up and when they're coming down, all structures. I'm not so interested in the life in between those two things. And it's just this idea of what are the bones that hold up our societies and what hold up our built environment. What goes on underneath the skin of the places we live. So that's really what I'm interested in. I just did a series. It's 6 prints, and one layer is printed on gampi, white ink on gampi, and then the other I've got blues. The colour of a blueprint is printed on mulberry paper, and I sort of float them over the top of each other, and I reveal some of them by pinning a bit of the gampi against the wall. And it's this idea that you've got the original drawing, the original blueprint that the architect thought of and did a drawing of. And then you've got the vestige, which is the print on white, the white print, which represents sort of the ghost image of the building that's no longer there. And then the gap in between that you can see when I pin the gampi back, that's sort of the life of the building in between that's now no longer there. So the paper is really important to the concept of the work. This idea of fragility and strength and how it's really opposite to what it seems to be.
And then scale?
Oh, scale. Yeah, I struggle with an image that's maybe 30 by 20, I just can't make an image work at that size. I can make small images work, tiny ones. And I think it's to do with, often the structures that I'm drawn to or that I depict or that I redraw and make my own are, they're all huge. And I want the viewer to have the same experience as me, really, that when they see it, they're sort of awed by it, or they look at it and they're like, oh, the scale is important for the viewer to sort of have that same visceral experience that I did when I sort of drew the thing. So that's really why I like to do large prints. And I've just got into this thing now where I just want to make larger and larger prints, which is why I bought this big press.
Well, yes. Speaking of large prints, so let's start from Slovenia to Australia. What was the thinking there?
So the thinking there was, after 2 years in Europe and the pandemic and the way it was handled in both UK and America, I think we just had enough by then. We'd been in America for like 18, 20 years by then. And I think we just felt we were never going to retire there. We actually only went there for 5 years. But my husband wouldn't go back to England. So we'd stayed and we had a lovely life. We loved San Francisco. We had, and for me, it was the best thing to be in America because my career thrived in America, which I don't think it would have in the UK. The opportunities in America are incredible. Everyone's so generous in America. It's a big pond and everyone is incredibly generous. And I loved it. I mean, all the people I met in the print world, incredible people, all of them. After I started going to Southern Graphics, which was sort of a bit later because my son's birthday always fell on the weekend of Southern Graphics. So I never went, and I really thought it was for universities and stuff, and I was an independent artist, so I never went. But when it came to San Francisco, I jumped in and then all these opportunities started coming my way. People invited me to be a visiting artist or run workshops. And my career kind of blossomed after that. It was amazing. And I got to travel all over America and it was incredible. And everyone was always so generous. They fly you out, they take you out for dinner, they put you up. It was incredible. So that's always been an amazing part of being in America. I don't think that would ever have happened to me anywhere else. When we were in Slovenia, we were having a beer in the beer garden. When things opened up again, we were like down to the beer garden. And we were just talking about it. And we were like, what are we going to do? Because we would have loved to have stayed in Europe. We would have loved to have set this up in Italy. But, after living in a country where we didn't speak the language for 2 years, and Slovenian is an impossible language. We got hello and 2 beers, please, is about as far as we got in 2 years. Also, Brexit had happened by then, so living in Europe was much more complicated. And I think we just thought, we did the pros and cons of living in Europe as opposed to living back in America or Australia. England was out by then for me. I just didn't want to go back to England. And my husband's Australian, so we decided we'd come back to Australia and set up something here. And we also knew that there was nothing in inner city Sydney like this, like what we're trying to do. In fact, when we moved here, for 2.5 years, I haven't made a single print until my press arrived because there's no open access studios and certainly no studios with a big enough press for me to work on. I mean, there are open access studios, sort of, they're not in the inner city and we didn't have a car. So, it just wasn't. And it rained the whole first year we were here. It just did not stop raining.
What?
Yeah. I know, it's like the monsoon. My husband loves the beach, and we went to the beach 3 times that summer because it just bucketed down. I mean, it was like the monsoon, like every day for a year. So, you don't get out much when it's like that. So, we just decided that we would come back to Australia because my husband has family here. My 2 boys are here now. My older son was here studying, and we just thought, let's just go back there and see what happens.
Okay.
So we went back to America for a year while I was preparing for my show with the Mario Avati Prize in Paris. So we went back and I worked at Calar for about 9 months solidly to get the show together. And then we went back to Europe for 3 or 4 months. And then we moved to Australia. And we were put in quarantine for 2 weeks.
Oh, my heavens.
Such fun. It was grim. And then they did away with quarantine the day after we got out.
Of course.
And yeah, and then here we are, you know.
All right. So, well, before we get to the building of the Jenny Robinson Studios, tell us about the Mario Avati Prize. How did that come about, and why do people not know about the Mario Avati? When I read your something about you, I was like, "What prize? What is that?"
I know, it's weird. So I was in Slovenia before I found a studio and way before I found somewhere to print. And I was sort of sitting in our little office in our little apartment in Ljubljana. And I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So I was scrolling through and I thought, oh, I'll apply for something, I'll just apply for something. And it popped up. And you're right, I had never seen it before either. I'd never heard of it. So I sort of read through it. It didn't cost anything to put your work in. So I thought, oh, that's good. And you didn't have to write anything. You didn't have to write a great big sort of piece of paper about what your art's about, blah, 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 which is hard and it takes a lot of time. And I thought, oh, well, that's easy. You just put something in. It doesn't cost you anything. You just had to put, I think, like 10 JPEGs in or something. So I brought some work to Ljubljana with me. So I thought, well, I better put in what I've got. So honestly, I didn't even think about it. I just sort of randomly put in these random images that I had. And then I forgot about it because, usually you don't get accepted. So I just forgot about it. And then they wrote and said, oh, you're through to the next level. And I was like, oh, well, that's good. And then I forgot about it again. And then I got an email one morning and I nearly just deleted it because I thought, oh, it'll be another rejection. And I opened it and I couldn't believe it. But the thing is, because it's unknown, I think relatively unknown. I mean, not in Europe, maybe. Maybe that's why it popped up on my computer was because I was in Europe.
Oh, maybe.
And maybe the algorithms, maybe that was why it popped up. But I think there were only 100 applicants not to put myself down, but I think there were only about 100 applicants that year. Yeah, I mean, I won it that year. So it was amazing. And honestly, and it was one of the best experiences I've ever had, that whole exhibition and the whole experience of it was amazing. And that was partly why we decided to move back to America after the 2 years. Because we could have stayed a bit longer in Ljubljana. We went for 2 years. We could have stayed longer, but there was nowhere for me to work. I mean, I couldn't keep flying to Barcelona because that was costing quite a lot. And because it was such an important exhibition for me, I wanted to really put my best foot forward. So we were due to go back anyway. So we went back for 9 months. We packed up the house. And I worked like 24/7 as well as packing up the house to put on the market. And then I worked at Klar the whole time. And I got the show together. And then we went back. I took it. In fact, I took it. They were great because I said, I don't frame anything because it's all too big and I can't, I haven't got that kind of money. But the prize comes with a $40,000 prize. And it comes with this opportunity to exhibit at the Institut de France, which is opposite the Louvre. And they've just done up their gallery. And it's incredible. They've painted it like this deep, dark, black blue colour. When you go in, you can't see anything. You're like, oh. But it's beautiful. Like, it's really beautiful. It's a beautiful old building. So I took my entire show in a golf bag and a ski bag.
Oh, my
which
gosh.
travels for free, by the way. When you travel with sports equipment, it travels for free on airlines.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, which makes a huge difference. If you take a tube, they'll charge you like $300 for it. But if you put it in a golf bag, it's free. And the golf bag's bigger. I bought a huge golf bag and I bought a huge ski bag. And I put my entire, rolled it all up. That's the other advantage of Japanese paper, actually, is that you can roll it all up really on small rolls. So I took the whole show in these 2 bags. It didn't cost me anything. When I found that out, I just paid $300 to bring a tube back from Austin to San Francisco, and I was outraged. I went to the oversized luggage to pick it up, and there were these 2 sort of golfers, with their hats on and their silly trousers on, waiting for their equipment. When they came through, it was huge. And I was like, how much did you pay for that then? And they said, oh, golf equipment goes for free. So ever since then, I put all my stuff in a golf bag. And they go, golf bag? And you go, yeah. Maybe put one.
That's brilliant.
It is. Printmakers, put your stuff in sports bags.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
Yeah, so I took it all over there, and then we hung the show, and they hung everything on magnets, and it was incredible. And then because it's the Institut de France, it's all very la-di-da. They treated us so well. I mean, we were invited to cocktail parties at this museum where they've got the biggest collection of Monets in the world, and you're like surrounded by...
Did you go to Marmottan?
Yes.
Did you meet Eric Demazier?
Yes, no, Eric and me, we're buddies because he actually runs the Mario Avati Prize.
I know.
He's the guy. He's lovely, isn't he?
Well, I've only met him once at the print fair in New York, but I want to talk to him for the podcast.
Oh God, definitely you should talk to him. Yeah, so he's the director of that, and he's like, "Oh, Jenny, what are you and Stuart doing tonight? Why don't you come along to this event?" And I was like, "Okay." So we rolled up, and it was like this big cocktail party, champagne, and he said, "Just tell them at the door you're a friend of mine," because they were taking tickets. And we're like, we're a friend of Eric's, and they're like, "Oh, please come in." We were over there this last summer. I had lunch with him. They go to this restaurant where all these people, but everyone is like, "Oh, it's Eric Demazier." It's like he's a rock star, and all these people come up and shake his hand while you're having lunch and stuff. It's hilarious. But he's such a nice man. He's really nice. So he heads up the Mario Avati Prize.
Oh, wow.
And I was over there because I was one of the jurors this year. They have about maybe 12 jurors. And they're all really high-flying people who run big galleries and collections and stuff like that. Yeah, so it was very interesting.
Huh. So does the winner always come back and juror the next one?
Yeah, I think that's the theory, but because of COVID, so I won it in 2019, but my show wasn't till 2021, which actually was perfect for me because it meant I could make work for the space. So I had a few installations and things that I normally wouldn't be able to do or show, because your own gallery doesn't really want you to do an installation because they can't sell it. So if you have a show in a gallery, they want you to do work, in my experience anyway.
Well, that brings up a really good point, which is your interest in large-scale work, which is really immersive and basically installation, is at complete odds with selling to a domestic-sized seeking crowd. But you're shooting for the moon. Like, you want to be in institutions, I'm taking it, right?
Yeah, well, I'd love to. Yes, please. No, I don't do it for that reason. I do it just because it's what I want to do. And at the moment, well, for that show, I could do it because I had the prize money, which in theory, I put that aside to pay for the press. I was selling some stuff and stuff. We were back in America, and my husband has a job, thank God, so I didn't have to buy the veggies and whatnot. I'm very lucky I was able to just completely spend 9 months doing that and not having to worry about doing workshops or earning money or anything. Yeah, so that's when I started doing the really big installation stuff on Gampi and not worrying about what would happen to it afterwards. It was, for me, that was probably the best show I'll ever have. I mean, it was just an amazing experience. We were in Paris for 4 weeks and we were being taken around. I mean, it was lovely. And also, actually, the nicest thing about that was it was still COVID, right? So it was like, when was it? Summer of 21. And and at that time, you still couldn't go out to restaurants without your carte sanitaire. So it was just after the vaccines had come out. So the day after we arrived in Paris, and it was summer, they introduced the carte sanitaire, which meant that you could, as long as you could prove you'd had a vaccination, you could go and sit in a restaurant. you could sit by the Seine and have a coffee with other people, like right next to you. It was so weird. But it was so amazing because suddenly you were living like a normal life again. Because up until the day before we arrived, you weren't allowed to do that, and suddenly, as long as you had your carte sanitaire, you could lead a relatively normal life. So, we were in Europe for 3 months, and we were just, you had to be careful, obviously. And it was very nerve-wracking sitting next to someone you didn't know after all that, just in a crowded restaurant. But it was amazing. We were so lucky with the timing. And the Academy, when I had my show, so I got there and I went and had a meeting with them, and I was like, I said, I am going to have an opening, aren't I? And they said, oh, no, we haven't done an opening since COVID began. And so we we don't think that's practical. And I was like, wait a minute. I said, I have worked so hard for this show. I've worked my butt off for this show. And I said, I want an opening. And I said, I've got all these people, I've got friends coming from America, and I've got a bunch of people coming from London. I can't. And they were like, oh, Jenny, And I said, who's after me then? Who has the show after me? And it was Annie Leibovitz.
Oh.
So I'm like, I bet you're going to give her a champagne reception, aren't you? And they were like, well, it's, a month away. And I said, well, if you're giving Annie Leibovitz a champagne reception, I want one. And they went, okay.
Oh.
So they did. They gave me a big opening, and it was lovely. They bought lots of champagne, and it was the first one that they'd had since COVID. So they invited lots of people, and it was great. It was really good. So we were there at a really good time, considering.
It's so hard to think back on that transition period. Oh gosh, I've blocked the whole thing out already.
Yeah. It was pretty bad, but it was good timing, I think. Yeah.
Oh, oy. Congratulations on that. And is there a catalog? I didn't find one online, but I didn't dig really hard.
I've got a bunch, and they had a few. They have some in the shop at the academy. I'll send you one. Just give me your address.
Yeah, no. Sometimes they have PDFs online that you can access.
Yeah, no, I'll send you an actual one.
All right. And did somebody write a nice essay about you? Who was that?
Yeah, I got Ellen Heck to write it, actually.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, because she's a really good writer. She studied, did she study philosophy at Brown's or something? Anyway, she has a nice way with words.
She's a smart one.
She is. She's a smarty pants.
I have her coming on to have an interview with me.
Oh, lovely. She's lovely. She's a lovely person. So, that's great. That's good. All
right. So have you named the new press?
No. You see, this is what we did on Miranda's podcast.
I heard.
And it was, none of the names did it for me.
Okay.
I don't know why.
Okay.
I can't think of a name. Actually, it took us 3 months to name our cat. So,
all right. Well, let's tell everybody, because I know what's going on, but tell everybody what's happening. So you got this giant press sent to Australia, to Sydney.
Yes. So when we decided that we'd come to Australia, we thought we'll sell our house in San Francisco, we'll make lots of money, and then we'll come to Australia and we'll buy a great, big, beautiful warehouse where we'll live, and we'll have a huge studio. But the reality is that Sydney house prices are insane.
Oh.
They are, I don't know, it feels like they're the most expensive in the world. They're not. But so when we got here, and the exchange rate was really good too. We bought our house in San Francisco 20 years ago. So, we made a good amount on the house. And we couldn't find anything. We couldn't find a postage stamp with the money we had. But eventually, after a year of looking, we found this dilapidated warehouse where we are now. And it was a wreck. And it was pouring with rain again, that whole sort of period. I didn't realize it rained so much in Sydney. It's like the monsoon, honestly. We've just had 2 weeks of constant rain.
Huh.
Today it stopped, but it has been like the monsoon. I actually quite like it. But anyway, I digress. So we found this warehouse, and it was a complete mess, had holes in the ceiling, water pouring everywhere, full of old ovens and refrigerators and rats and cockroaches. And we just fell in love with it. We were like, this is it. We were just like, oh. And it's a single-story warehouse exactly in the area we wanted to be, because we wanted to be right in the inner west, they call it, which is sort of, I don't know what the equivalent would be. It's sort of like you can walk to the city from here, and we're near Redfern Station, which is all the trains stop at Redfern Station, and we're like a 7-minute walk from there. So our idea was that we would be somewhere where people can get to really easily, because there are no print shops in Sydney, even sort of in the if you go out even a lot more than where we are, you still won't come across a print studio. So we had hoped to be in this area, but we figured no chance in hell would we'd end up in some sort of the boondocks in some industrial estate. But anyway, this place came up, and it's not anywhere near as big as we would have liked, but it's just in the area we wanted, and we live here as well, so we wanted it to be in an area that had stuff around it. So we bought it. I had cold feet about it because it cost so much, but we've pretty much put everything we've ever earned into this building. So it has been a bit scary. So we have the bit that we live in, and then we have the studio next door, and then the third bit of the building we separated off to rent to help us pay the mortgage, because they gave us a huge mortgage. So that's where we are. So it's a completely self-contained little studio. No one else wanted this warehouse because you weren't allowed to build up. You couldn't knock it down, build a bunch of condos, which is usually what happens.
Right.
And so they come along and they knock it down and they build a skyscraper. But you weren't allowed to do that. So no one wanted it. So we managed to get it. So we're very inner west, as they call it, inner city.
Wow. It's a dream. I've always wanted to open a print shop, as people know if they listen. And my husband has always wanted to convert a warehouse into something like
do it.
Yeah. Sounds awesome.
I know it has been lovely. I mean, the space is a lot smaller than I had imagined. We are a non-toxic studio, and part of the reason for that is because actually I don't really have room for an acid room. Also, I haven't quite got my head around. Australia is a nanny state. It's like rules and regulations up the wazoo. So I don't know what the rules and regulations are as yet about getting rid of toxic material.
Oh, okay.
Like acid, even ferric and stuff. I haven't worked with etching for such a long time that I'm not there yet. I mean, we might have to. And I do have a small room at the back that I could put that in. But at the moment, I'd rather just have a non-toxic approach and have people bring their plates, if they have plates, to print here. So this is more like come and print with us rather than come and make etchings.
In the shop, you're making your own work, and will you offer your services as a collaborative printer for people and do workshops and all that?
Yes. So we've been open about 4 months now. So we found the warehouse in November 2022, I think. And then planning permission took 4 months. And then it took 9 months to build. So we got in around September. That's when my press arrived last year. We've been up and running since about February. So we've run 3 workshops. I've run one. I had Sarah Amos. So she was over here because she's Australian as well. And she comes over every summer. So she taught a workshop, which was fantastic. Laura Berman was here I think she's here on a Fulbright or something. So she did a weekend workshop. And then I've got one on Japanese backing and seaming coming up. Nice. And then we're stopping the workshops until October because we're going away. I'm going to Flatbed to make some prints, and
nice.
Then we're going on holidays. The other thing is, Anne, it's a very small market here. It's a very small group. I mean, it's been surprising to me coming from America how small it is. And there are some amazing printmakers in Australia, really make beautiful work. But there aren't many of them because it's such a small pool. So, it's a lot smaller than I thought it was going to be in terms of sort of trying to get people in.
That's funny. I would not have guessed that.
Yeah, I mean, Sydney's a huge city, but, printmaking is it's a small little area. And there's only 1 or 2 galleries that deal with works on paper in Sydney. I mean, Melbourne is traditionally a much more cultural city. They have this competition between Melbourne and Sydney. So Sydney is like the big brash brother. Everyone's at the beach and, it's all about money up here, is the way they see it. And then Melbourne is the cultural centre. And so they have Australian print workshop down there, which has been going for about 40 years, where they publish high-end prints with artists, Australian artists, and they have open access. And so they've been going for a long time, and they get a lot of grants from the government. And then there's Baldeson Press, which is been going for about 25 years, I think. And that was the wife of George Baldeson, who was an artist in Australia, a very well-known one, and he died quite young. So she set that up. And that's beautiful. It's in the country. It's surrounded by eucalyptus, and they have kangaroos bouncing through. Can you believe it? They offer workshops. They offer contract printing and stuff. And they're a lovely bunch of people. They've been so helpful to me. They couldn't have been more helpful. I mean, they don't see me at all as competition because we're trying something a bit different, and also we're in Sydney. But they couldn't have been more helpful. They're very generous with their knowledge and how to set things up and stuff. So that's been really nice.
I'm amazed. I mean, Australia is so huge. You would think there would be more shops than that.
Yeah, well, the country is huge, but there aren't that many people.
Well, right.
It's so spread out.
Are the university art departments offering printmaking? Is it a thing for students?
Well, yeah, but they've closed down a lot of them. I
Mm.
mean, there's only a few universities anyway. It's not like America, obviously. So I think the University of Sydney, which actually is very close to us, just at the back here, they had an incredible printmaking studio a little bit further out than the inner west, and it was amazing. It was in this old building, and it overlooked the water, and I think it was there for years, and then they just closed it down. And so they moved them from over there to this campus, but they reduced the size of the department. And then the University of New South Wales, they had a thriving print department, which has also been not closed, but it's been put under the umbrella of graphic arts or something, printed arts or something. So that's on its way out. And then you have the National Art School, which has survived those cuts. And because the other universities have cut back, they're trying to take that space, I think.
Oh.
But it is pretty bad.
Wow.
That printmaking has been pretty much sidelined. They've had a conservative government for a long time, not now, but they had a government that just took money out of the arts, and, which those conservative governments always do.
First thing to go, the arts.
First thing to go. And it's so annoying because what do you do when you're on holiday? You go to museums and music and concerts, and that's what everybody does. So stupid.
Yeah, short-sighted for sure. In your work, I was watching a video of you using a Dremel, I think, on maybe MDF, and I thought, oh my gosh, is she a relief printer? But then I'm seeing you're doing litho, you're doing etching. I'm like, oh my gosh, she does it all.
Well, I do use a Dremel, but I use different substrates depending on what I'm trying the print to look like, and also what I can get my hands on. Because every time you move country, you have to start from scratch because they don't have the same, like Australia. It's so hard to get stuff here. It's especially since the pandemic, and everything is so expensive. Like a dry point needle that I can get in America for $9 or $12, $90 here.
What?
I know. It's just like, why? So things like paper and inks are super expensive here. So when I come over to Flatbed in the summer, I'm going to bring my golf bag and I'm going to stuff it full of paper, dry point needles and ink. Just going to stuff it full, because it's expensive here, and it's hard to get hold of stuff. So I work on cardboard plates, so I can't get the cardboard here that I used to use. So I have found some that actually is better, but it's super expensive. Huh. When I was in Ljubljana, I couldn't get any of those materials. In Europe, it's different. Everything is different. It takes so long to find places that sell the stuff. So I started using plastic that I got from a print shop in London. But then it turned out, I rolled some up and I left it in the car. We were in Florence for a few days, and it was summer, and it's heat. Well, they use it to make molds, so they heat it and it makes molds. So I rolled it up and I left it in the car, and it was 40 degrees. And when I came back to get it, it had fused, and I'd only taken one print of it, and it was a huge print, and it had just fused. So when I unrolled it, it snapped into about 8 pieces.
Sorry, I shouldn't laugh.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So I bought a whole bunch of that stuff. So I've still got it, but it's very delicate. If it gets hot, Yeah. So it just depends. And then I use a Dremel to make the marks, like aquatin, really. And I use aluminium as well, because that gives a beautiful line.
Oh, wait. So when I was watching you use the Dremel, and I feel like you were describing it as dry point, and I thought, is that really what that... My little cataloger's brain started going like, I'm not sure I would describe that as dry point.
What would you describe it as in your little catalog?
Well, I mean, in olden days, if you had a piece of copper or whatever your matrix was, and you were dragging with a needle, drawing with a needle, it would be dry point. If you were pushing with a burin, it would be engraving. And in between those, then there's the mezzotint sort of deal. But I don't know that I don't know where I would put the Dremel reductive. I don't know.
That's true. There should be a name that covers all those things.
Right.
But I think of it as dry point just because And it doesn't matter what the matrix is. It's, it could be cardboard, it could be copper, or it could be aluminium or whatever, plastic. I mean, I never use plexi because it's a horrible material to work on. It's hard to work, but there are some plastics. Polycarbonate is lovely to work on because you can roll it, which means you can travel with it, and it's very soft, so it gives a lovely soft mark. But yeah, no, I've never thought of it like that, really. I've just thought, well, it's just mark making. And people often call my work collagraphs, and that it annoys me, not because I don't like collagraphs, but because I always think a collagraph is where you build up.
Added,
and
yeah.
I'm not building anything up. I'm just drawing into a plate. And so that's why I think of them as dry points, because I'm just drawing into them. It's just how you get to where you want to go with your marks.
So after you have reductively dropped marks into something and you're inking it, are you inking in intaglio or are you inking relief?
No, inking intaglio.
Okay.
So it's just like I just see it as an etching or a dry point, dry point. Really.
All right.
So yeah, it's just inking. I've tried doing relief rolls, but the marks are just too shallow.
Oh.
And they fill up. I mean, sometimes it can work and give you a different effect, but yeah, the marks are a little bit too shallow. It's not like an engraving where the marks are quite deep.
Wow. All right. So I'm going to circle back around to the giant press that arrived from Conrad, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And the fact that you need to name it. So we're going to throw that out to we'll see how it goes.
Yes, no, I'd love to name it. I would really love to name it. My son said call her Old Bessie, but his van is called Old Bessie, so I can't call her Old Bessie. I quite like Bessie. And then I was going to call it after my mum, who died last year. And then I thought, no, that's weird. Can't do that. And then someone said the Duchess of Darlington, because we live in Darlington. Right. And I thought, I quite like Duchess, but you've got this whole colonial history in this area. So that's not going to fly, especially in this area, which is very indigenous. If anyone can come up with a goodie.
And how big is the press? I heard you say it's the largest in the Southern Hemisphere.
Well, I've been told off about that. So I have to say, I have been told off quite well about that. No, it's the largest American-French. I have to say it's the largest American-French tool press in Australia. Okay. In fact, Tom Conrad told me it was the largest American-French tool press in the Southern Hemisphere. So I have to put that in front because otherwise people get it. Sydney University does have one that's about 3 inches bigger. Over here. That's just behind me. So, and then there's one up in Queensland where they have a bigger one apparently. So,
how big is the press bed?
It's 53 inches by 96.
Wow.
So it's bigger than the one I used to use at Calar. It's 2 tons. It's pretty big, but it's just a beautiful press. I have to say, it's just lovely to work on. So when we run workshops in the studio, our pull to get people in, we don't want to teach, this is how you do a lino, this is how you do an etching, this is how you do a dry point. That's already being done. It's being done in Melbourne really well. There's one place in North Sydney that does it, but it's hard to get to, which is why I've never been there because we didn't have a car for ages. And they teach all the sort of the basic as well as more advanced classes. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the big press like front and central. It's like the heart of our studio. And so when we run workshops, we want to work, we can only really fit 5 or 6 people in. So we want them to come and we want them to make huge prints. We want them to push, the boundaries of what they feel comfortable with, or just come and really continue doing big prints or something. And because there aren't many big presses, it's an opportunity for them to come and learn new techniques like working on cardboard or, collagraph like Sarah Amos teaches, but to do it on a big scale rather than to come and just, I'm going to work this big. And it's been really successful in that respect because people get very excited and they're 5-day workshops. So they're quite intensive. And, I don't like people to take lunch. It's just like, you do not have time for lunch. Work. And when we ran my course, it was hot. It was it was February, so it was the middle of summer. And it was 100% humidity. It was boiling. And it was sort of like between 32 and 34, maybe a bit hotter. But with the humidity, I mean, it was insanely hot. And I'm just like, work.
Yeah.
whip out. But they, after 5 days, they came away with, oh my God, such beautiful prints that they'd done in 5 days. It was, they had two big 30 by 40 plates each. So they put two plates together. So they were making 60 by 40 prints.
Wow.
And it was lovely. And I think having that press to do that in, they all really enjoyed having the scale to work to. So that's kind of what we're aiming to do. And what I really want to do is bring people over from the US and from Europe, from England, maybe, to teach.
Oh, nice.
In their field. So like when Sarah came, she taught her technique, and I taught my technique. So I'm trying to sort of talk up Sydney and Australia as a place to come for a holiday, because it is a fantastic place to come for a holiday. It's gorgeous. The beaches are incredible. The food's amazing. It's great. And it's kind of prehistoric too, like all the vegetation and the birds, and it's all huge. They make the birds make all these mad noises. It's like prehistory.
Wow.
There's no twittering of birds in the dawn. It's just like this screeching and screaming. So we want to sort of talk up Sydney a bit on our social media, so that people think, oh, I'd love to go to Sydney for a holiday and also maybe print or teach a workshop at the same time. And they should, because it's lovely out here.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a hard sell, really.
Have you ever been to Australia?
I've only been to Melbourne.
Oh, okay, the posh bit, the cultured side.
Yeah, it was a courier trip for the National Gallery of Art when I worked there, and I can't remember what I think it was a Renoir maybe for a show. I don't even remember. And
you brought one over.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not sure I've talked about courier trips on the podcast, but like you basically are escorting this work of art through, the whole bowels of the cargo in the airports and everything, and it takes forever. But then you get someplace and you're like, wow, I'm in Melbourne. What the heck?
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, so you go through with the piece until they've placed it on the plane.
As far as they'll let you. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But yeah, anybody who does courier trips for museums will have some really crazy stories for you. I remember a colleague had a story about bringing something to Venice, and they got the rigging and they wrapped up the crate with the lines, and they lifted up over, the water, and nightmare.
Because everything, well, yeah, I guess almost everything comes in by boat, doesn't it? Well, it
right,
does.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you can drive and park on Venice, but then you're boating it from there.
Yeah, I think the crazy story that I had was I delivered a Picasso to the Picasso Museum in the Gothic quarter of Barcelona, the streets of which are, as you know, about 6 feet wide. And so the museum is in an old palazzo, and there's no loading dock. And so you have to unload on the street, which is also another no-no.
Yeah, right, because Barcelona.
Right? Yeah, but then when we got there and the truck had pulled up, and I was in the car behind it with a courier from the Met, and there wasn't even enough room for people to walk by the truck in this alleyway road thing. So they couldn't have run with the crate anyway. So I was like, well, all right, I think we're okay.
It's good security.
Yeah, exactly.
I know, that's insane, isn't it? Actually, when you go and see shows, you never really think of how it gets there. You walk up the stairs or whatever, and you just assume it magically appears, I suppose. God, that must have been so interesting.
Yeah, there were. Yes, I have flown on cargo planes, where you're sitting behind the cockpit with, the little galley in the bed, and you're just like sleeping away across the pond. And I've flown in FedEx planes and all sorts of things.
Oh my God, that's amazing! You should do a podcast about that. You should. Yeah. It's so interesting, because I don't think people really think about that. It's so interesting.
Yeah, and I think Melbourne was the farthest away. Well, of course, it's probably as far as you can go. But yeah, I've been to Japan and Israel and Brazil and,
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an amazing job.
Yeah, I know. It was fun.
Yeah.
While it lasted.
Yeah. Well, your next project is obviously, finding a warehouse and doing it up.
I was watching the the progress of the shop on Instagram, I was like, I want to be there so bad. And, oh, it looks so fun.
It was fun. Actually, we didn't have to do that much to the studio because that was the one, because it's in the middle. It was the one room that seemed quite solid and didn't have like drips everywhere. So the warehouse that we're renting had the most work, and our property. But yeah, no, it was fun, and I ended up sort of pretty much project managing it. The builders were great. We were renting in Redfern, it wasn't far, so I'd get on my bike every morning, and I became besties with our site manager. So I'd bring him a cup of tea and whatnot. Gave me all the gossip. So when anything was a bit like not quite right, he'd text me. And he'd go, I think you might want to come down. I'd cycle down. I could see all the builders. Oh, my God, here she comes again. Like a bad penny. And I'd go, what's this? Why have you done that? What's this? Why have you done that? So I ended up being here every single day, just checking that because they didn't do any drawings. We had no blueprints. I mean, I designed it, but they were supposed to give us blueprints off my design. And we never got them. And we were like, where are the blueprints? Oh, they're coming. We're just changing them. Where are the blueprints? Oh, they're coming. And we never got them. So consequently, everybody was working off a different set of plans. Like,
oh no.
The electricians and the plumbers, and they all just had their own thing going. So I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? But I really enjoyed it, and it gave me somewhere to put my creative energy while I wasn't working, because I really haven't done anything for 2 years. So and it dealt with my bossy side. So I actually really had quite a lot of fun.
I bet. When the press arrived, did Tom Conrad come in and put it back together for you?
No, it came in one piece.
What?
Yeah. So it took quite a bit longer than I'd hoped, but it was fine because we wouldn't have had anywhere to put it anyway, because it came just as they were finishing off the studio. Funnily enough, it came on the same ship that brought our belongings a year previously from San Francisco. But it took a while. It was sitting off LA for like 2 months or something. I was where's my trip? But in fact, it came at exactly the right time. We were doing Sydney Contemporary, the art fair here, which is just up the road. And we did it just to get the word out about the studios. There are a lot of people here, printmakers, who are very excited that we have this now, and that there's a big press here, and there's an open access studio and somewhere to come. So they've been amazing.
I also don't think I have ever, I knew this intellectually, but I don't think I've ever really thought about how rich the printmaking network and resources in the United States really is when compared to other places. Like it's kind of astonishing.
It really is. And I miss it a lot because, first of all, printmakers are the best people. They're super generous. Yeah. And if you ask a painter, how'd you get that? Oh, I'm not going to tell you that. It took me 20 years. Whereas a printmaker is just like, you'll be there like 3 hours later. It's like, oh my God, I wish I'd never asked. But they're so generous. They'll tell you everything, like everything. And I'm sure they're like that everywhere, but it's much smaller pockets of people. And I think the smaller the pond or the pocket, the more careful people are about how they spread the word. Because in America, it's so big and there's money, it seems like universities have the money to, invest in that side of things. England's a little bit the same. They don't seem to have this visiting artist culture where you invite artists to come in and talk to students and show them work and talk about technique. They don't seem to have that here because they don't have the money. The universities don't seem to have the money to invite, which I think is a big mistake because students learn so much from practicing artists, people who are actually trying to make a living at art, and how they go about doing that. Maybe some students end up wanting to be master printers or work with other artists printing. Well, unless you get someone to talk to you about that, you don't really know it's out there. Because when I was at college in England, we didn't have any of that. We had a few visiting artists from London. Apart from that, there really wasn't much talk about what are you going to do after you leave? How are you going to try and make a living? There was none of that. It's just like, bye, out you go.
Right. Good luck.
Yes, good luck. You'll be fine. And you leave and you're like, what, and then of course, in those days, all education in England was free. So you didn't leave with debt, you left free as a bird. But your parents would be a bit like, what are you going to do now? And you'd be like, I don't know. Who knows? Go traveling.
Yeah, right. My dad was a little like that. He's like, what are you going to do now? Like, I'm going to march straight down to New York and get a job in a museum. God damn it. And I did it.
Well done. No, you see, that never occurred to me. I worked in a print studio after I left college. We had a silkscreen guy who ran a publishing company in London. So, and it was in a rough part of London. I remember the first day I went up there and I got a ticket at the tube station. And the tube station guy said to me, what's a nice girl like you going to Ladbroke Grove for? He said, it's a bit rough down there, darling. So yeah, I worked there for a while. I probably knocked 5 years off my life too, because there was no ventilation. It was all oil based. It was all really toxic cleanup, and there was no health and safety at all. And you'd come out of cleaning screens like sort of breathing. Yeah, pretty bad. Yeah.
My school had a guy who was teaching printmaking, but he was really kind of a curmudgeon, so I never ventured in at all. I took a drawing class from him. I'm like, oh no. But I didn't know that this whole working in a print shop, doing any of this, I had no idea until so much later. Like I sometimes think maybe I would have done that instead. I mean, not that I'm an artist, but the collaborative print thing.
How did you end up being the collector for prints then? Did you learn as you went about what's involved in prints?
Yeah, basically, when I was a youngster and in college, I was shooting at American painting, 20th century American painting. And my first job happened to be in a print room at the National Gallery. And I was like, well, watercolors are painting, sort of. Maybe I could do this. And then finally I was like, oh, prints are the thing.
Right. Fell in love with them.
Yeah, I did. I don't know that I would have jumped into prints in quite the same way without a couple of, teacher friends who were like, this is the coolest thing ever. You should come along with me on this journey. My friend True, who does the history of prints part of our podcast. And, I don't think if it wasn't for him, I don't think I would have become the print person that I am, honestly.
Oh, right.
Like everything I know, I learned from him.
Oh, right. But was he working in a museum as well then? No,
he was teaching at the art school down the street. And he was bringing his classes in, and I was hosting them.
Ah, I see. And you were showing the bits. Yeah. I remember we used to do that at college. We'd go to the British Museum and see all the Rembrandts and stuff.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing.
Cool.
I know, it's so interesting how people come to it, isn't it? And the roots.
Yeah, I know. It is weird. So you're coming to Flatbed this summer?
Yes, I'm really excited. It's funny, actually. I think it was 2 weeks after we arrived in Australia, I got an email from Catherine saying, Jenny, I've been meaning to ask you to come. I'm like, I'm in Australia now, because we were in San Francisco before, so obviously that would have been a bit easier. But no, I'm really excited. So I'm going to be making a litho with Alicia, I think.
Oh, good. Alyssa, yeah.
Alyssa. And then I think I'm making an etching with Catherine. I'll be there for 2 weeks. So that would be really exciting, because I did litho at college, but again, we had a curmudgeon. He was sleeping with some of the students too, which I was should not be doing that. Even back in the day, I was very sort of judgy about that. And he just wasn't very nice. He was just not very nice to the people he wasn't sleeping with. I can say that because he's dead now and I'm not going to name names. But yeah, it was like, not good. But he just couldn't give a toss about teaching litho to people who, were maybe interested in that. I did mostly etching, but so I actually hated litho for years. I was just like, litho. And then I was invited up by NASCAD up to Nova Scotia to work with Jill Graham. And so I went up there in 2018, just before we moved to Slovenia. And I had the best 2 weeks working with her. We got on really well. I always think of those as a real collaboration. It's not, you have the image, but master printers have the know-how, and nothing can happen unless you can work together like that. And It was just a brilliant experience, and it was lovely to do that big print, and she figured out how we could flip it and make it bigger and all that stuff. So it was brilliant. So I am looking forward to doing another litho, because I haven't done one since then. So
that's great.
And it's a whole different way of working too,
Yeah. The folks at Flatbed are lovely. They're some of my favorite people. And Austin is, I'm sure you've been there, but it's a hoo-ha. You'll have a great time.
Yeah. And my husband's coming with me because his office is in Austin. So we'll, and then we'll go on holiday after that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's great.
Good. Yeah.
So you're on the Insta and you have worked with several dealers that you are definitely findable online, and people can find your work and buy it from you or the galleries. And you should be, we're going to a little shout out for Jenny.
Oh, thank you, Anne.
Yeah, thank you for coming on Platemark. It's been delightful getting to know you. We've never met in person before, and but I've admired your work for a long time, and so it was great talking to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me on. I've actually, you've been in my diary. It's like, I'm talking to Anne soon. It's given me a little thing to look forward to. So thank you very much for having me. It's been really lovely.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for listening to this episode of Platemark with my guest, Jenny Robinson. I hope you enjoyed her. I thought she was a delight, and I love talking to her. These outro credits are generally a way to thank the people that helped me make this podcast, so I'll do that, but also just want to put in a plug for the Brooklyn Fine Art Print Fair, which is a new print fair coming up next March in 2025. To coincide with the IFPDA fair, we're creating a new New York Print Week. So stay tuned for word on that. I'm busy gathering vendors to our fold, and by the time this is produced, I'm sure I'll be chock-a-block full. But wanted to just say how excited I am to be working with Luther Davis over at Powerhouse Arts on their print fair. It is Powerhouse's print fair, and Fine Arts Baltimore is helping them make it happen. That's me and Brian Miller. So thanks to them for offering me a really fun opportunity to make something really great happen for the ecosystem. It aligns with my mission beautifully. All right, so thank you to Jenny for being a great guest on the pod today. Also, as usual, a thank you to Michael Diamond for the use of his original music, to Dan Fury for helping me with sound and editing, and to Lee Turner and Skip Barnhart for the use of their studio sounds at the top and bottom of the pod. As you know, images are over on the podcast show notes at platemarkpodcast.com, and you can also sign up for our newsletter over there, and think about heading over to Facebook and joining our happy, merry band over there. All right, I think that's it. I'll see you next time.